locked into a Cyber Frontiers podcast episode with Ben Morris, who's the CISO of the World Rugby Federation. We're here to talk a little bit about Ben's experience, what's happening in the world of rugby from a security point of view, and a little bit about his background. So welcome, Ben.
Hi, thank you for having me, and looking forward to obviously talking about the exciting changes going on in World Rugby at the moment, and hopefully providing some snippets for people to take away and either get people into cybersecurity, because everything's interconnected nowadays, and maybe lean upon some of my lessons learned. We're all making mistakes along the way, and hopefully, talking about my background can help people navigate their own careers too.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that. I think just to kick us off, do you want to give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of how you got into the cyber world and where you're up to at the moment, and a little bit more about the World Rugby? I'm certainly a big rugby fan, so I'm excited to hear this one.
Yeah, so I don't have, and you probably hear this from a lot of people in fortunate positions in leadership of cybersecurity, information security. I didn't plan it. I started out in what you call a traditional technical engineering role, and that was through an apprenticeship. I didn't really know where I wanted to go, but I just knew I needed to be involved with technology, and engineering just seemed to be that nice pivot point. I was always interested in building computers, ripping things apart, breaking it, putting it back together. And that's kind of where things started. I built out a methodology of learning, and that kind of grew from that point. I was a solo engineer for a very small company, and I didn't have the luxury to turn to somebody going, "Can you just do this for me?" So I had to really build
the hard graft.
Yeah, I've never worked so hard in my life. And then from there, I kind of worked into a number of companies, late rooms, TUI travel, moving more into kind of specialised fields like service management, became an incident manager for them. And that's kind of where my passion for technology came in. Before, I didn't really have a clue about technology and all that kind of stuff. And then when I did join that company, it showed me all the different lenses of how all this comes together. And that's where I first saw security. Before, this might sound crazy, but as an engineer, I had no idea. I just built stuff and hoped it ran. I didn't think about, how do I keep this secure? And I think that's quite common even till today, which is a shame, around that awareness piece. And then ultimately, I had the opportunity to kind of go out on my own. I did a bit of contracting, went into the public sector, worked for the government police as crisis manager for them, which was a very interesting time where I built a lot of soft skills around stakeholder management, resilience, which I know we'll go on to shortly. And then I had the opportunity when I was down in London to come back to Manchester and take a leadership position. I think from there I had a desire to manage and mentor people, although at the time I was just going with the flow, taking, I guess, gambles with my career, going, that sounds cool, I'm going to do that. That sounds really interesting. I never really stayed still. When I felt my skills was plateauing, you'll notice that throughout my career anyway, I moved on. I needed to keep growing because I had that burning desire to do more and do better. And then, I had the fortunate nature in that leadership position to really get stuck into information security. So it was a very startup position where I was, and they were like, we really want to get ISO 27001, and nobody in the company really knows what they're doing. Ben, do you want it? I'm like, I'm always that person to say yes, and I'll figure it out afterwards. So
add another string to the bow.
Yeah. And from there, I started to develop that, this is what security, and this is really cool. And you always hear those, you see the movies, you see the blogs online about hackers and the hoodies and stuff, and it's like, cybersecurity is much cooler than service management. So I'm like, I'll see where I can take this. And from that role, and this is a trend through the last kind of several years, because I joined startups, I was made redundant, and I got approached through my network. So all my roles since leaving public sector have all been through people I know. I've never really applied for a position. They've approached me going, we've got this gig, do you want it? And that opportunity was, we've got this service management head of position, and we noticed you did ISO. Do you want to come in and do security too? And I'm like, so I got a double-barrel job title, which is head of service management and information security. I was like, wow, okay, that's wild. And then, from there, I started to really, I did a lot of certifications, training, I felt like a lot of imposter syndrome when I first started to go, and this is common as well, is when you do change your career and you do kind of pivot into different domains, you have this kind of, I shouldn't be here. Why do I have this kind of responsibility? And that's kind of driven me on for the last kind of now 10 years being in security, is figuring out my gaps, my weaknesses, and using that imposter syndrome as like a little bit of a benefit of pushing me into learning a subject and taking it really, really seriously. Like I've got a methodology for learning now where it's like I will absorb myself into that subject because maybe it is a vulnerability in myself about that imposter syndrome, and that I've kind of spun it on its head. Instead of feeling it as it's a down or weakness of mine, I've used it as a strength. And then kind of the last 7 years, probably the most interesting, going on to kind of my current role at World Rugby. I joined a number of startups where they really needed to globalise quickly. And I discussed with these roles, I just want to do security now. Like I've done service management for like 10 years and I don't really have that burning desire as I did with security. So one of those roles was a startup. I was one of the first employees, and I was able to really build out my knowledge. I built a team from scratch from just myself into a team of 30 across the globe, US, APAC, and Europe. And that really cemented myself going, I need to stay in this field. And that was around the same time cybersecurity as a domain really blew up globally as well. Before that, people were just doing it as a side piece, as their job. You had an engineer that did a bit of security, or you had, case in point myself, you had a head of who did a bit of security on the side. So I was like, this is the perfect time to really hang my boots up on the service management front and really push myself into security. And that was hyper successful. You know, that was a company that unfortunately is no longer going, called Wejo. And that company really gave me the confidence to really specialize in this domain. And it gave me a lot of credibility when it comes to building out teams, which is always really scary because it's all on you. When you're the first employee in a new team and you're given the mantle to build out a team and a function, it's a scary prospect. And I think that really gave me confidence in myself that I can do this now. And from there, another redundancy, I moved on to a really well-established UK brand called the Hook Group, or THG. And I was able to really fine-tune my leadership skills, my capabilities within cybersecurity, effectively deputy CISO of THG, where I was able to prove myself on a global stage. Although the previous one, yes, it was global, a lot of the operations just in a geographical location, but THG has got operations all around the globe, 10,000 employees, and the responsibility as a public listed company was pretty insane. I was there for about 2-3 years until I decided I needed to challenge myself again. I felt like I plateaued a bit, where my skills, I just wasn't developing enough. And fortunately, World Rugby came knocking, and I'm like, I've never done sport. I've done retail, finance, automotive, tourism, leisure, data center hosting, you know, a public sector. But I've never really done sport, and I'm a massive one of my passions outside of work is sport. I love all of it. It would spend about an hour talking about sports, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm like, yeah, rugby sounds... yeah, the next podcast. And I didn't really know what to make of it at first. I wasn't really jumping for joy because I'm like, when I looked at the specification, I wasn't really sure what they were looking for. And you could tell like they were an organisation which was really evolving. And after doing a bit of research into World Rugby and its changes and its ambitions, I'm like, I really have to take a shot at this. So now I've been there for nearly 12 months, so my anniversary is coming up soon. And it's probably the best career decision I've ever made. And I say that to people all the time when they say, you've got one of the best jobs out there at the moment. I'm like, I actually do feel like I do because of the opportunity and the growth to really be passionate about a sport and see that value in fans and in people who really love the sport is something that I'm really, really driven for. So, yeah, I guess just as a bit of a high-level view of World Rugby, in the last kind of 18 months to 2 years, the organisation, although traditionally is a federation and it always will be a federation, so it governs the game of rugby. So we have responsibility to make sure that all the membership unions are supported and they've got the funds and the platform to grow the game across the globe. World Rugby as a whole has huge responsibilities to its fans. We've got about 860 million fans globally. It's one of the most recognised sports out there right now, and ultimately there was a decision made to go, we really want to build the World Cups ourselves. We need a sustainable model to grow the game, not just the men's game, which has always been the one that gets the headlines, also the women's game. So I was brought on board to really elevate the security in World Rugby to the next level. So it's not just securing the federation, which is still hyper important. We now have an entertainment and media business that is building these events and is doing the Netflix series and doing all the kind of really cool PR stuff.
Yeah.
So now, if you think about as a business, we've got this really foundational federation organization that we have to secure, but we've now got this startup buzz of an entertainment and media business. So no day is the same for me. I'm pivoting from 1 minute I'm looking at like how we can improve our concussion data around medical science, and then I'm pivoting over to how do we secure a venue for World Cup next year. So it's pretty wild. It's been a really good journey so far, but ultimately, hopefully you can get across from my career is I've taken risks with it. I've gambled. I didn't really have like a 10-year plan where I need to get to this point, because if I did, I probably would be ahead of where I thought I'd be, especially in my age. I'm fortunate. I'm still in my 30s, and with the responsibility I have, I'm very fortunate. And that's one thing. Gratitude is a huge thing for me, and I try and give back as much as I can, do mentorship, do talks like this to really get people excited about coming into cybersecurity. But I know we'll talk on to kind of lessons learned from my career, but ultimately the key thing that I want to get across to people is, if you don't have a plan, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's starting out and just having a bit of an idea. Like I said, I got into technology because I liked breaking things and building computers. And now I'm in information security in one of the most globally recognized sports. It's like, that's a bit of a wild jump, isn't it? So, if I got into technology thinking that would be the case, I would have probably been like, some kind of, have I got a crystal ball? Because that's just wild to even consider the idea. So, hopefully to yourself and the listeners, really, they can resonate to that story, and probably a lot more questions you've got on your mind.
I was saying there was a lot there. Thank you very much for running through that. There's a few bits that really stuck out to me is the organic path into this role now, and no two CISOs are the same in their path, and that's something I really want to get across in these podcasts to people that are thinking of getting into cyber or wanting to transition to it. Is possible. There is so many different layers, so many different avenues, so many different ways to get into this industry, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger. You also mentioned there about imposter syndrome. I've seen this a lot on posts, in podcasts, and is there any tips that you can give to anyone that could be experiencing this? I can imagine there'd be people that are transitioning into more senior roles like yourself, taking those risks and have to learn how to fly once they've jumped, So have you got any tips around that?
I think the first thing to really put out there is it's normal. And it doesn't just affect anybody at any particular level of their career. You can be starting out and you can have imposter syndrome, and you can be myself still with imposter syndrome. I don't think it will ever leave me. And I think that's normal. I really want to put it out there, like it's normal to have imposter syndrome. I'd be interested to see a study of like how many people, particularly in security, how many people like affected by imposter syndrome. Some people are scared to mention it because you're putting a label on yourself, and stuff like that. But for me, my biggest like lessons learned when it comes to imposter syndrome is try and use it as that strength. You have something that a lot of other people don't, which is a tenacity to learn something and really get into the detail, because I feel like I shouldn't be here, so by doing so, I'm going to make sure that I do deserve to be here. So I'm going to really get into the material. I'm going to research, ask questions to people, put myself out there to really understand the subject. That's the first lesson learned is, using it, and try and use it as a strength. The other one is be easy on yourself. Things take time. Unfortunately, that is always the status quo with any subject. Is I think the theory is it takes 10,000 hours to really understand and become an expert in a subject. And I think that is so resonant with anything that I talk about. Is you can't really expect to pivot your career into a new subject and just go, right, I've nailed it, I'm good. It's not happening. You need to really invest yourself and use that imposter syndrome as a lever to pull. So that's my biggest advice, is normalizing is a key part. And I always do. I do talks to teams and stuff like that, saying imposter syndrome's fine. Like, it's not like, shouldn't be given a stigma. I think it's just more of a,
like you say, it's a label.
yeah, and people hate label. Me too. And sometimes I don't like saying that I've got imposter syndrome, because it's like, oh, you're labeling yourself now. Like, yeah, I label myself, but I'm using it as a benefit to push myself forward. Yeah. And now, I'm reaping the benefits because I've been able to pivot my career like 3-4 times. And I don't think I'd be able to do that if I didn't have imposter syndrome, because I've had to absorb myself into content and material to get myself at that level. Yeah. I still struggle with the usual stuff, like when it comes to reading or doing exams, hate it. But I know for me, like, my best way to learn is being around people. We spoke just before we was kicking off, is being around people and being around that kind of buzz, and that's where I really learn. When I started out, I was with people around desks, and I was just taking snippets from people, and I was making notes, and people thought, why are you making notes? I'm like, I need to absorb this. I need to go back and do some more research. So ISO 27001, I was like, I have no idea. Read it down. I went away and I did some research. So that's where imposter syndrome comes into it. It's like absorbing yourself into content, using it as a strength, be around people, and then also trying to normalize it. It's okay. But I think you also have to explain to people that you do have that, because sometimes you can go into a meeting or you're new to an organization, and you don't maybe not know the source material. It's okay to say, I don't really know. But I'll tell you what, I'll figure it out, because I've got this background of all this kind of stuff where I can learn things really quickly. So give the confidence to people going, I'm new to this kind of idea, but give me a couple of weeks and I'll come back and I'm going to ask you loads of questions about this. So be warned, I think.
Throughout my career, I've definitely had my fair share of imposter syndrome. I mean, being in recruitment, learning new markets, going in, not having a technical mind, but having to understand completely new technologies, setting up a podcast, doing events, all of this sort of stuff. I do feel that, and that advice is how I've been working with it, is going in, immersing myself in it, building a network of people and asking lots of questions. Great advice there. I think you touched on another thing of global growth within hiring across the globe. I'm interested to find out a little bit more of how you hire and the cultural elements and how that works on a global scale, and how do you incorporate a team, essentially, a team culture with diverse cultures in it as well.
Yeah, that was a hard lesson that I learned in my first global role. Is I was very insular in regards to the culture of the UK. I thought everybody must like this approach, especially being a Mancunian, and I'm very much laid back and I'm friendly and stuff like that. Some people are a bit given back, though, and why are you so friendly all of a sudden? Are you fake? You know what I mean? You get that.
What do you want from me?
Exactly. And so when I started to recruit out, particularly in the US, it was difficult at first because people were shocked. Especially, I think you have to remember, in the US, there's also an expectation or cultural realization that, oh, this person's from the UK, so they must be really posh, or they must do this, or they must do that. I'm like, yeah, it's not the case. So when I first started recruiting in the US, I actually had to go out there physically, because I thought it's very difficult, really, to recruit people over teams with the culture divide and kind of have that friendly approach. I know that isn't a luxury for everybody. Second one is believing in yourself and making things a little bit more friendlier. So when I started to recruit in the US, I always set the scene at the start of an interview, going, this is what I'm about. This is my kind of approach to interviews. I'm a very friendly, kind of laughing and joke kind of person, informal. I'm not reading off a script. Even just today, I'm just that kind of guy, really. And if you set the expectations at the start when you're recruiting, that's cool. So that's when it comes to interviewing people and getting that kind of cultural divide, manage expectations, share with them how you deal with people, and then also ask them the question going, how approachable are you? Not in a negative way, but going, tell me a bit about you, what you're all about, what sports do you like is a really good one to ask people.
Of course.
Going, do you follow basketball or baseball? Tell me a bit about it. What do you do in your free time to kind of break that ice? And when you realise, and you have much more effective interview when you do that. The part of the culture that I struggled with is two parts. One is the salary divide. You probably know that more than me. When you're in the UK, you kind of get a decent idea after a period of time, like there's certain salary bands and stuff like that for certain roles. In the US, it's completely backwards. So I'm interviewing people and they're starting out and they're on stupidly six figures. I'm like, this is insane. If I was on this and if I was doing that role now in the UK, that would be half that. And then, explaining that, and then the benefits is another one. when you explain to people in the US, oh, we've got a benefits package. I'm like, what? What's benefits? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, yeah, that's an interesting one. So
That's why the salary's so bad.
yeah, the benefits don't exist, and then like employee rights. It's so hit and miss.
And stuff,
That is so strange. So that's my first shock when I built our team out in the US and I got my notice from one of the team going, I found a better opportunity. I'm leaving in a week. I'm like, what?
2 weeks max, no matter what level.
It's wild. I'm like, okay, and it goes twofold. In the UK, we are fortunate. We have employment law, and it protects you against redundancy, and you can kind of get yourself on your feet. In the US, they don't have that. No. So that was the big divide. Culturally, you mentioned how do you gel those teams together. And I would say try not to really radically change things. So when we had the US team come on board, we shift our daily stand-ups to a time that could accommodate both. Get people together all the time. Mm-hmm. So we initially had a stand-up at like 9 o'clock in the morning, 15 minutes. What you doing? How we doing? Any problems? Any escalations? All that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. We shifted that to 4 o'clock. And the team in the UK found that strange because they're like, oh, I'm talking about what I've done in a day instead of talking about what I'm going to do in a day. I'm like, I understand it's a pivot, but ultimately we want to bring the US arm into these conversations. We want to feel more friendly. And then we also organise like trips out. We obviously you can't do it that regular because it's a massive long haul. Mm-hmm. But when we had, particularly in the IT operations space, one of the teams that we had is we made sure like a team member would go over there, even if it's just building laptops, but being next to the team and seeing them physically was a huge thing. So that was a big one, moving kind of regular meetings and accommodating the team, trying to be physically present as much as you can, involve them in decision making. So, when you want to make a decision, have to accommodate them. So it's like, oh, we want to make a shift pattern change. We're not thinking about the USA guys, like how we're going to do that. And same with like policies that you want to roll out and get their feedback. How would US colleagues take that approach when it comes to policy? Yeah. I would say with the US, and with a joking expression, is more cowboyish than the UK. The UK like red tape. We know that through the government, don't we? And red tape is a big thing in the UK. We love our process. The US are like, we'll just get it done. Yeah. You know what I mean? So the concept of a policy.
Worry about it later.
yeah, we'll do that in a bit. Yeah. So those are the big cultural things. Firstly, the kind of general mentality and positioning from the US and especially US towards the UK and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So trying to manage that and be as friendly as possible and manage expectations and learn a bit more about their culture is a big one. Yeah. So if a team member likes basketball, do a bit of reading into it. Like get a notification on your phone how the results were on that weekend and mention it in a stand-up. It's a big thing. Secondly is around not making assumptions that things exist in that continent is a big one. So if you're talking on a call about benefits in the UK and then US entities like that, what's that about? Yeah. Manage that really effectively. Mm-hmm. Don't let your US colleagues find out that you've got an amazing benefits package and they don't have the same. I think that's really horrible, and that creates a real big void of between the teams. Thirdly is around managing comms, stand-ups, all that can accommodate the team and getting them involved in decision making. They bring a different lens towards the decision. In the UK, we're all very we'll all get along with an idea. When you bring it to the US, they'll give a different opinion, and actually that opinion is much more valid or potentially a different way to approach something. So those are the 4 ways that I've integrated teams. Yeah,
just on that last one, I think I said this in the last podcast as well. It's giving the power back to the team that are going to be heading up those changes in the first place. They will give a new, different aspect of how it works in their world, and not just someone that's sort of pushing the order down in that sense. Absolutely. You mentioned about resilience. I would like to talk a bit more about this. I've heard of an analogy between a referee and the cyber world. Yeah. I haven't heard it yet. So
So obviously moving into sport, I'm around sport a lot, and especially the kind of refereeing element of it, and also as a general sports fan. You see refereeing decisions all the time being scrutinised. And it was really bad during the Rugby World Cup 2023, where there was actually campaigns going after the referees after a bad decision. You see it in football all the time. You see it in boxing. You see it in all these kind of sports. Yeah. I think I just saw a reel today of a tennis referee making the wrong decision and they got absolutely slammed for it. And I think it's a really big problem that the world of sport is facing when it comes to refereeing and being 100% perfect. We see it with VAR and all the other systems bringing in trying to do this. We're removing a little bit the human element, and the referees expected to be 100% right all the time. It's wild. Like no other role I can think about, you have to be 100%. No. Apart from one other. Cybersecurity, you're not expected to fail.
No.
Even though I always say when I come to organisations, we're going to get hacked, guys. We just need to absorb the impact and try and reduce it as much as possible. It's not a when, it's an if with cybersecurity. It's not an if, it's a when. So when I was paralleling that with referees, it's a very similar challenge we face. Like, you know, we're not afford to fail in cybersecurity. They're not afford to fail in refereeing. So it's like the similarity is wild. And there was an industry, I can't remember how long ago it was. It was aerospace. They went through a massive radical change when it comes to lessons learned and not promoting really or celebrating, but you know, recognizing failure as a enormity and actually not demonizing and causing this kind of blame culture, and actually embracing that failure is going to happen and putting a process around that to try and absorb this kind of massive stigma around mistakes are going to happen. Obviously, when people's lives are in stake, they had to do this, and they radically shifted it now, where they've got every single person in the organization kind of reports a fault, a failure, and that's not going to be blamed. You know, it's embraced, and they're going to take it as seriously as possible. So then I was thinking, like, can we do a similar thing in cybersecurity and refereeing where we can kind of isolate and support that these things happen and get behind the teams, get behind the referees. That's, you know, we're not foolproof. We're not going to be 100%. We'll try our best. And I think that's the main thing to take away from it. And I think working in sport, I've had a massive more appreciation for refereeing than I ever have done. You know, you have to reckon these are human people. They have to go away and they've got their day lives, and the last thing they want to do is get slammed on social media or hunted down and, you know, hurled abuse at. It's wild. And then I'm going to use the Crowdstrike thing. It's so relevant nowadays.
Yeah. Throw it into everywhere.
Yeah, it's just insane. Like, so that went out, and I think it's a 50-50 split in cybersecurity. 50% of the kind of who I follow anyway in my network were getting behind Crowdstrike and had a broad understanding of it, right? So if you understand like how software works and how these things happen, mistakes can occur. And I think that the challenge with the Crowdstrike issue was it was just so widespread. And that's also a good thing for Crowdstrike because they're a market leader, and it is always the case. So people were getting behind it going, don't jump to conclusions, get behind the team. This is probably the worst time they've ever had, especially the team investigating it. And imagine the individuals or the teams that push that update, they're probably feeling horrible, and the last thing you need is to get on top of them. So 50% of I'd say about 50% were on board and supporting. I definitely behind the scenes was 100% supportive. Yeah. I think the last thing you needed is another person jumping on the bandwagon to go, what are you doing? Can I help? In World Rugby, we were affected not directly but indirectly. We had suppliers who were impacted. We had a team going out to the Olympics, and we had travel disruption. Huge problem for us. But at no point did I blame the people in CrowdStrike. The one thing that I was really pushing for is how do making sure this doesn't happen again. So where's the report? And I've read the detailed report. It's very interesting. So that was a side of cybersecurity, which really that's the one that I'm really trying to get behind. There's the other side of it, which is like, how can this be allowed to happen? Blaming, getting on top of like the engineers, the developers, the people coming out with radical conclusions of why it could have happened, and maybe it was an inside job to cause disruption. It's like, this is just insane. And I think that's what the refereeing circuit is happening, is you got the fans really getting I'd say some fans are really supportive of the referees, but I think nowadays with technology and video replay, people go, oh, the video showed this decision, and why did you get it wrong? It's like, if you've ever played the sport, if you've ever been involved in the sport, you recognise that these things happen in a split second. Yeah. You don't have to
you're running, or you've got 40 people or loads of people directly in your view, and like it's just to hit that 100% every time is just unrealistic.
I know. I've been involved in like the ref comms in rugby, and it's so interesting to hear like how the referees are communicating to each other. There's so much passion behind it, and there's so much technology to help them out. But this is happening in split seconds. They're running around. If it was me, I'd be on my knees, absolutely gasping for air. And they're expected to not only keep with the flow of the game, to keep the game as entertaining as possible for the fans, but also make the right decision. Also, exactly. And I think that's so difficult. So I think that's my analogy I want to get around. Really, is how do we, as a cybersecurity, information security community, really support that mistakes are going to happen, but get behind people more. I think there is a movement, but there is still this blame culture, and that usually comes from either the way I'd like to explain it is, if you're impacted and it's directly going against what your role is, people don't like to be seen as incompetent in their role. So sometimes they look to push that on somebody else. So, if you were directly impacted by the Crowdstrike issue, I can only imagine you had the board on your back going, why did we make this decision?
Deflect.
And they deflect it going, it's all Crowdstrike, so I need to go out there and put some blame on somebody and, maybe have a go at the Crowdstrike. I understand that. I guess it's having that credibility and that kind of defensive structure to explain to your board, this happens, and we're going to put controls in place to maybe mitigate it, but these things do happen. Having that defensive depth, having resilience and stuff like that. Technology resilience is key. So yeah, that would be my main thing really, is how do we continue to support and educate people that actually mistakes will happen in cybersecurity. And it's only going to get worse with the likes of AI and deepfakes, misinformation. I know we'll go on to kind of geopolitics in a second, but yeah, that's ultimately, from my perspective, how we can get better is not embracing, but understanding it's going to happen and helping people.
Yeah, I think it's. I think there's a lot of, like you're saying, blame culture when stuff like this happens, and for it to be fixed, it needs to be. It can't be fixed, but for it to be easier, it needs to be an industry where people get together, get behind each other, resolve issues, and gain awareness of users and the board as well, to say this might happen, but we will mitigate as much risk as possible. And we need your support to do it. We don't need people blaming us and having a go. So it's great to know that there was, I saw it myself, loads of people getting behind. My half of my network was definitely behind them. We mentioned there about geopolitics. I think with the amount of events that World Rugby do globally, how do you essentially secure it all?
Well, if I knew the answer, I was on a call yesterday with a lot of the UK kind of sporting organisations around operating in dangerous countries. And geopolitics is a big part of that. Ultimately we can't shy away from it. I think we're all aware of the stuff going on right now across the globe, and sport isn't insulated from that. It is going to happen, and decisions do get made at the highest points in sporting federations. World Rugby isn't the same. Where is it safe for fans to go to an event? Is it safe for players to go to an event? That's the first one. Is player safety and fan safety is number one. So if there is a conflict going on, for example in Russia right now, we're not going to run an event there. That's just insane. You can't really expect people to do that. But then there's other countries where there's maybe not an ongoing conflict. There is
stability.
Stability is the absolute perfect word there, where we just have to be hesitant that these things are occurring. So from a technology, I can only really talk from a technology perspective. We educate our staff before we go out there. So when we send out staff to operate the back office systems, the rugby systems that are running, we educate our staff around these things are happening. These are the things to be secure. You've got we always insist of a printout of key contacts if you are in a situation. These are the people you need to contact. That's the key one. But ultimately, it's around information sharing. Fortunately, there's a good network of people in the UK where they do get together through the NCSC, where they share intelligence, they share information about operating in countries. Olympics was a really interesting when it comes to that. So the way the Olympics works, just for anybody who maybe not be involved in it, the Olympics is the organizer or the coordinator of all the sports, and then they invite the federations to run the sport. Ultimately the Olympics can't be expected to be the expert of every single sport going on. It's just not. It's wild to even appreciate that. So for World Rugby, for the Sevens event that was at the World Cup, which was a huge success for us, we were invited out to run the game for all the games. Amazing. So our staff was called out, and we were heavily collaborating with the IOC. But this is what happens with every single sport. They get called in to support the event. And the Olympics go through a lot of readiness exercises, what if scenarios, what if this happened, and that our team were heavily involved in that. So that's the first one, is when you're operating a global event, that is key, readiness, getting people involved, communicating. Otherwise, if it's more of a local event where you're expected to travel to, like rugby is a key point, educate your staff, educate your kind of the people who are operating the systems, and have that emergency kind of break glass process where it's like, right, okay, something's going wrong. We need to mobilise, and everybody's aware. We practice crisis management a lot at World Rugby for that instance. Player safety, fan safety is absolutely number one. And I think if a game got called off because that was in jeopardy, every single person would get behind it because they understand.
Yeah.
I think the part with geopolitics, which is growing, and it was a problem at the Olympics, is misinformation and deepfakes. There was a number of threats at the Olympics of athletes being deepfaked and breaking into social media accounts and the like, which I think we'll see more and more of
100%.
in the future. And the concern that we have, particularly for myself, and speaking just from my opinion, politicians and very influential celebrities and stuff coming out and making a statement, and it's actually a deepfake.
Yeah.
Imagine if in the Olympics this year, the president came out and made a speech that I don't know, a sport or celebrity or a particular event is an absolute shambolic mess, and that will go far and wide.
Yeah.
So I think misinformation. I think it's our biggest threat. If I'm going to get my crystal ball out because apparently I must have one for my career. My crystal ball is saying misinformation is probably the biggest threat for us right now. And that's not just cybersecurity. I don't know what we do for cybersecurity. It's obviously a lot of systems coming out there, AI, to try and detect deep fakes, but that is the big one. Misinformation and stuff like that is going to be a huge threat because things are evolving quickly in AI and deep fakes. Nowadays, it's quite easy to detect, mouth movement and stuff. But some of the stuff I've seen, it's like, how would I detect that? That, if that's posted all over social media, you wouldn't know the difference.
No. I met a client earlier this week who's a managed service provider, and one of their clients came to them saying they had hired 2 people that weren't even real people, and they were trying to access the servers from different countries and stuff like that. And I was just like, the Teams call was someone. It looked like someone. The speech was perfect. Everything was great, but they weren't real. It's starting to heat up a bit.
It's not just like when it comes to kind of hiring, that's a big challenge because you can give you effectively keys to crown jewels really. But I know there was one publicised in Asia in the last kind of couple of months where that deepfake was used to defraud an organisation. So they deepfaked a CFO. To clear invoices.
Yeah,
and that's
I've heard this one.
And that's so wild, and that's what I think is going to get worse. Like in cybersecurity, training people to look for phishing emails. Phishing's evolved crazily now, and all the defences we have in place. Yeah, it's still one of the biggest threats, I think, based on the report that I've seen recently. But how do you protect against somebody basically scraping your company's details and their social media, crafting some kind of deep fake information, using that to do some kind of spear phishing attack against him and defrauding the organisation? The only way you're protecting it is you got very, very good process in place.
Yeah.
And that can't be expected, especially when
multi-layered process.
Yeah, the criminals are getting really smart with it. So, I've had my fair share of incidents, of course, through my career. And the scariest ones for me is when things are happening at a pace which I guess the organisation is creaking, and then the criminals look for that. So they've either got initial access into the organisation, they're looking to see, this invoice is being chased consistently. So what we'll do is we'll insert ourselves in the conversation and taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
If you add into the mix there deep fake information, we've got a verification process. If we're going to change your banking information, we need to do a Teams call. Rubbing hands, that's easy to deep fake that. We'll do that. That's the scariest thing for me. The misinformation, the deep fake information, the scraping of stuff. If I only had the solution for that, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be probably a millionaire right now, you know what I mean? But I don't really mean to scare people. I think ultimately it's to acknowledge that this is a growing threat area, and geopolitics is going to be leveraged. And you'll see that in campaigns. We see it in the US, don't we, at the moment, with misinformation, geopolitics and stuff like that. So that's the big one for me, is how do we better evolve ourselves as an industry to acknowledge that misinformation, and the use of Gen AI and all this kind of stuff is going to come around.
Yeah, there needs to be a lot of process around the advancements, but they're happening so quick. It's hard to keep pace with it. I think that's definitely where we're going.
It is, and from my perspective, and we're going to go full circle, so it's going to sound like we've got this scripted, and it really isn't. It's an organic conversation. It's having that kind of desire to learn. So for me, a year ago, I didn't really know much about AI. I knew it was happening, but I was like, there's a bit of a gimmick in it. Like nowadays, I've absorbed myself into understand what its capabilities are, speaking to the business, like how they're using it.
Yeah.
I'm far from an expert in AI, but now I have an appreciation of what its benefits are, but also the risk to us, not just as an organisation, but as a general populace. And the more I've researched into it, the more I scare myself, going, oh, that's possible now. And with technology, it advances so quickly. I always say, like, if you look back from the last 10 years, how technology evolved, and then the 10 years before that, it's like, whoa, the next 10 years is going to be wild.
Yeah.
So, yeah, having that kind of desire to learn a subject, going like to what we were talking about earlier, do that. Like, learn where the emerging technologies are, the emerging threats. I always say, like, having appreciation for what is now is always really important when you build your roadmaps and your strategies as a CISO, but... Yeah. I think what you're being hired as into most organisations is also be forward thinking.
Yeah.
What should we be concerned about in the next 10 years? And I think that separates CISOs from good CISOs to great CISOs. Is they're looking at the future. They're looking at how it can affect the business, how we can potentially use it as an opportunity instead of as a weakness, and then educating that to your board. Going, just to let you know, you probably all heard about AI. And there is huge benefits to it, but also as an organisation, we need to be ready for the threats that come with that.
Yeah,
and I think that generally is how I, as a practitioner, am going about AI. Is I'm just continue to learn, absorb it. I know there's a lot of, ironically, misinformation about AI as well, but with that, I generally would say if you are getting into general technology, having that desire to learn and look at emerging threats is going to set you apart from the crowd.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Cool. I'm just, I think we've got time for one more.
Okay.
I always try to end up on this one, but what would be the one best piece of advice for someone looking to get into cyber?
Oh, God, that's a big question, isn't it?
It's a two-parter. And what's the best bit of advice that you've had in your career?
Okay. So getting into cyber. So nowadays, before I got into cyber, there wasn't really many opportunities. Nowadays, there's so many pathways, so many kind of pivots that you can go into cybersecurity. You can go into the model governance route, where if you like reading and you like creating stuff and educating and building awareness, perfect, go into governance. And there's lots of pathways to do that. Engineering, if you've got a passion to rip things apart and build things again, go into engineering as an example. Because looking at your background and where you've come from as an individual will lend you towards what pathway to take. The first step in cybersecurity is picking a pathway, getting into an organisation, be that an apprenticeship or an internship or whatever it may be, absorb the information around you. You might be more an operational person, so you like to be analytical. You like to analyse things and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's your pathway. I don't think there is just a de facto how to get in cybersecurity nowadays. I think it's more of there is opportunities out there. There is, I'm going to say it, I don't think there's a skills shortage or a shortage in people wanting to get into cybersecurity, which there's a myth. I think there's a disconnect between people at entry level and mid level. Mm-hmm. So when I'm hiring for teams, I recognise that it's easy to get entry level, but it's damn hard to get mid range, like experienced people. That's where the shortage is right now.
Yep.
And what we need to do as a community is to bridge the divide between entry-level positions into that mid-level senior people. And the way to do that is give people time, open up opportunities, build your teams around expecting people to develop from those entry levels. So, yeah, my general advice is, firstly, just getting involved into a pathway which you can resonate with as an individual. If you like people, get into governance. And of course, I'm generalising, but if you like engineering or you like ripping things apart and you like to problem solve, get into engineering. If you like to be analytical, you like data, you like numbers, probably go into a SOC or operations. Mm-hmm. That would be kind of my advice. There's lots of training out there. Geez, I think I saw there's an annual certification pathway that comes out. You may have seen it, and I think there's like 300 plus different certifications and pathways and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Training isn't the problem. I think there's potential a gap in opportunities. But yeah, that would be my advice. And best advice I've received, I'm fortunate where I've worked with some really, really smart people, and I'm trying to pick one is difficult. I think the one thing that's really helped me in my career and elevated me to the next level is the person will know when I say this advice who it is. And it started out when I really started to build myself into leadership. And my question to him was, how do you build credibility in a business when you first start? It's so difficult, right? Especially when you're joining and you don't really know what you're doing. We've got like imposter syndrome, all that kind of stuff. It's like, how do I cement myself when actually I'm still trying to convince myself that I'm good at this job? And his advice was, to build your credibility is find a problem that everybody's trying to fix. So calling it a burning imperative, fix it straight away and show people that you've got something about you.
Yeah.
So that's the advice. Find a burning imperative when you join an organization, fix it, communicate it really well, build relationships with those people that had that burning imperative. Because guess what? They will tell their peers and the people that they work with going, tell you what, Ben, I gave him this problem just as a bit of a challenge, thinking he won't be able to fix it, and he fixed it for me really quickly. And he's a person that you need to go to. He's reliable, and he can get things done.
Yeah,
and that changes the mentality. And I did it at World Rugby. I'm not going to spoil what their burning imperative was there, but they had, and every single organisation does have it. And the way to find it is speak to people.
Yeah.
First couple of weeks, speak to people. Say, what's your biggest problem? Try and make it relevant to your area. If they say my biggest problem is the toilets don't work, I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with that, mate. But it's like, oh yeah,
out.
yeah. So example, you might speak to somebody in the marketing area, and it's like, oh, we've always had a trouble with accessing our accounts. It's been really troublesome. And the MFA is really just restrictive. Okay,
Yeah.
that's something I can fix, and that's what I do. I find a burning imperative, fix it, communicate it to him, going, leave it with me. I'm not going to give a time frame because I'm not going to commit to something that I have no idea about. And then that will snowball because more people will come to you going, you help me, and stuff like that. So then you'll build up this what I call credit. I always compare, like, in an organisation when it comes to political favour, call it as like credit.
Yeah,
I can
make
it relevant. Exactly, cash. Everybody gets cash. Okay, so what I'm doing at the moment is to join an organisation, I've got no credit.
Yeah.
Right? So then what I do is fix problems and I get a bit of credit. Build that credit over time, fixing these problems. And then at some point you need to make a change, which might not be the most favourable change, but I'm like, right, this is going to cost me 200 credit, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I need to bank this and I need to spend it. So that might be I need to change the policy and I'm going to outlaw BYOD as an example.
Yeah.
Okay, this is going to hurt people. But because I've built so many relationships and I've built so much credit in the bank, by doing this, they're going to get on board and they'll actually be supportive of it because they understand and I've explained to them why we need to do it. So that's my biggest advice. Find the burning imperative, build your credit, spend the credit when you need to, but do it tactically.
Good. I like that. Another great analogy. I love that. Well, thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
It was great to have you.
Yeah. No, thank you again.